I want to talk about where you found this book and why you thought it's obviously an incredibly popular book, but it has a literary device that works in a book that is a difficult translation for a movie. And we'll talk about some of those difficult translations. But when you guys came across the book, what was it that grabbed you as a producer that you saw a movie in its future?
Well, the first thing is that you just couldn't stop reading it. It was a fun read. It was one of those things where you just kind of you look up and you're 100 pages in and you haven't really thought about it. You just kind of turn the pages. And so the first thing you do when you ever get any piece of material is you're going to have to call someone else up and say, I think you should read this. So if you've had fun reading it, that's always a good sign. Uh, and then it had this kind of Hitchcockian hook, the kind of rear window of it all, and there was these three amazing characters, and so it just, it seemed like there was something there that could be turned into something interesting, even though it was so internal in you know, their heads, the whole book.
But it also has an unreliable narrator at its center. An unreliable narrator is an interesting literary device, but it doesn't always work cinematically, especially when you're thinking about specific scenes like the tunnel scene. So as you're thinking about the adaptation of how you deal with a literary device, the unreliable narrator, and make it cinematic, what were the kinds of conversations that you had with your collaborators about how to make that work?
Well, for me, and what attracted me to the material most of all was the complexities of how rock bottom Rachel was and is, and the responsibility to show that truthfully for all those that have known someone in that position. And I just felt like if I really leaned into the pain and the truth of what she was going through, not only is she, unreliable, but empathy bubbles up, and so you want to root for her. So you're not constantly wondering, is she telling us the truth? You're wondering, is she going to fix herself?
Right.
And I just thought that was, you know, more of a complex way to portray it than just, is she telling me the truth or not?
Danny, the cues that are listed on an album soundtrack are probably made up as the album is being sent off to the printers. But I'm going to list a couple of cues that you have on the soundtrack. All fucked up, touch myself, wasted, a sad liar, really creepy, and my favorite cue, deviled eggs. Now, the cues tell us a little bit about what the scenes are about, but the music obviously tells us a lot more about what the scenes are about. Could you talk about the initial ideas that you gave Tate and about your interest in this material and what you were throwing at him when you first met?
Well, in the beginning, it is like deviled eggs against the wall because the idea is, when especially if you're working with a director for the first time, you don't know really what's going to stick, and so the idea, my goal is always to come up with a lot of different things, and through that, I'll go, oh, I see, we're going to go this way or we're going to go this way, and usually in that first presentation, there's things that I think are safer and there's things that I think are more off the track. And so the fun started really with our first presentation, my first presentation of the music, because Tate was responding to all the things that were off the track. And I said, all right, this is going to be fun.
In terms of persuading him that those are good choices?
I didn't have to persuade.
Okay.
In fact, I think we'd listen to music and he'd nod and he'd go, fuck it up. And I'd go, you got it. It's like music to my ears. That's just what a composer wants to hear. And so I just got
rid of the strings.
So what does that mean? What does that mean programmatically? Does that mean changing the instrumentation, using
Make
the
it darker.
synthesizer more, making it darker, making it more atonal, more detuned?
All those things.
Okay.
So, just have more fun. For me, it's just like have more fun with it, and I did. So hence you had like kind of weird plucked stringed instruments and things, which I didn't think initially would survive because it was very different than the temp score, which was much more modulated and adult, and that was definitely one way to play the movie, and I was hoping we'd take it in a kind of a nastier musical direction, and Tate was very encouraging in that department, and composers love being nasty with their music.
Jared, I want to ask you about some of the initial conversations you had about casting with Tate and the kind of cast you were looking for, and how that coincided with moving the story from London into New York, and did those two things, I guess, which came first, and how did the casting follow?
The conversations about moving it happened really early on. I think before the script was even commissioned, and I think we just thought it would be more accessible to the market that way a little bit. And and then Emily for it was she. We started talking about her fairly early on, and Tate was a fan, and everybody kind of got on board. And then there was quickly. A brief moment where we talked about her British accent, but Tate, I think could speak specifically to what you liked about her.
I flew to London and met with Emily, and as you know, in the novel, Paula's Rachel has let herself go in a more voluptuous way, and we were talking, and Emily's like, I guess I'm gonna need to gain some weight, and it was clear, and this is true, she couldn't gain 2 ounces if she ate a Big Mac every hour. She has that metabolism. And as she was talking about that, I started talking to her about, it's about, you can still let yourself go. It's about isolationism and loneliness, and we can still see that you're not who you were, and then it just hit me that she should keep her accent, not only as a wink and a nod to the novel, but in my mind, she's even further away from home and is probably in a position where she couldn't go back because she's told him a bunch of lies and she's trapped. And I just thought that would add a great layer to it.
And what are the conversations that you had with her about addiction and alcoholism and a way in which you wanted to, I won't say honor, but make sure that you were treating it with the seriousness that the disease requires and that you are authentic to what that experience is like?
Well, she wasn't familiar with it, and as you know, a lot of countries and cultures don't really use that word. They just can't drink very well. So I've had experiences with it with loved ones, and as a lot of people have, and so she just dove in head first, and I think she watched every single episode of Intervention. And what she learned, which was great, and what I told her, is it's often a very silent disease and you don't see it, and people are trying very hard to be still and composed, and she brought that to it. We didn't want it to be comical. We didn't need Otis from Mayberry, and so quickly that can venture into that. So I just really, I applaud her. She really studied it and did it perfectly, in my opinion.
And did you think about, too, that other people in this story have their own addictions, that they're wrestling with, Megan and Tom probably, gratification through sex, and I guess through home furnishings? I mean that kind of seriously, about material things, and about how every character in the principal story needs something to validate their existence.
No, absolutely. It's funny. I think Anna sought validation through Angora sweaters and the Pottery Barn catalog. And funny enough, Megan just wanted to be liked and loved. And so she sought sex out for that. And I think Tom has just lost all control. I told Justin, I said, I think Tom is that guy that was the rock star in college and he moved to Wall Street and was going to be that traitor, But he's in a Nissan out in the burbs. And his way to feel in control was his sex from his glory days, if you will. So in many ways, their addiction and their medication was the same.
When you were talking with, I suspect you met with Paula Hawkins about what you want to do with her novel, just as you probably met with Catherine Sockett for the help, what are the kinds of things you need to say to that person, and what are the kinds of things you're hoping you're going to hear back from them?
I couldn't believe it, but the two conversations 5 years apart were pretty much identical. I met with Paula at the Claridge's. We sat down. She goes, "So what do you see?" I'm not going to try to do an accent. She goes, "What are your plans?" I said, "I really think we need to lean into the addiction and the sexuality and the violence and the darkness of this story." And she went, "All right, great, get on with it." And that was it. Wow. And Catherine Sockett said, "You make movies, I write books, have fun."
And was there something in the book that you tried to preserve that you could mathematically never preserve, that you knew that people who really loved the book were going to miss, that just never worked, even if you shot it, didn't work editorially?
For me, it was Rachel, the Rachel in the novel, the fun, anecdotal, self-deprecating narration. You know, I thought Rachel was really charming in the novel. I didn't judge her as maybe as much as some did, and it was really hard making the movie. You know, there was not going to be that scene with her and some girls at Chili's talking about alcoholism, and I missed that. I missed not being able to, and you didn't want to go into the voiceover. That's what I wished would have fit into this movie more.
And when you are having conversations with your actors about what happens next for them, even though that's not part of the story, even though that's not really part of the novel, do you plot that out? Do you want the actors to know where their characters are going and if things are going to work out for them?
Absolutely. I mean, that's kind of how I rehearse. A lot of my rehearsing is in-depth conversation about their characters and people we know like them. And that's why I told you I already had my ideas of how they all began, and we shared those conversations. I told Emily I think Rachel was the fun party girl on the Lower East Side, and and then one day her and Tom fell in love, and we talked about that and where she. Yeah, absolutely. We all had an idea of what happened afterwards.
And how does Rachel turn out in your mind? Everything goes.
In my mind, Rachel is very protective of herself now. I think she has control and power, but it's in a peaceful way. I think she controls her inner peace and her well-being, and she could be anywhere. And I think that's kind of a lesson of this movie is we all look for these idyllic lives that we create, and we rarely relish in the good. And I think that's what messes us up.
Tate, Danny, Jared, thank you guys for coming in, and thank you
you
guys
all.
for sticking around.